There's a big difference. If one guy raises before the flop, he's the first guy in the pot, he could have a lot of different hands. But once it's raised and re-raised, it usually narrows it down a little, and the strength of the hands is usually quite a bit higher. So it means that your own hands goes down in value, unless you really have a premium hand. So a hand like ace-6 suited plays a lot better when you can get in there cheap with a lot of other players. So you get good odds for hitting your flush or whatever you're trying to hit. You flop the straight, you have the nuts, you can't be beat. You bet out as you've done before. He calls because he's kind of catching on to what you're doing. Now you can check on the turn and make him bet, make him take away the pot. You will win bigger pots when you flop the big hands. Don't try and trap too often. I'm not saying you should never trap, but keep it to a minimum. Be very aggressive, and also when you flop the big hands. Very aggressive, that will win you bigger pots in the long run. That's what you're trying to do, win the big pots. Sometimes you will have an amateur player sitting at the table, and you can feel the way he's shuffling his chips, the way he's sitting around the table. You get a good feel for what he has. Does he have a good holding, a weak holding? And you can use that information later. But a lot of times, most of the players, especially myself, what I do a lot of times, I look at my opponents, but I also make sure that if sometimes I have a really good hand, I shuffle my chips in one way, and the next time I have a really weak hand, I shuffle my chips in exactly the same way. So sometimes these tells can actually be a trap. So be careful when you put a tell on some person. Oh, you say, I know for sure, he had it last time, he has it this time, he did exactly the same nervous movement. Don't be too sure. You might be the one falling into a trap. So the tells, as far as I'm concerned, is a little bit overrated. Sometimes your opponent will give it away, but more than often, he's the one trapping you. So be careful. Why did I develop that style? Well, my background, as crazy as it may sound, is very mathematical, very analytical. And even though it might seem crazy, it might look crazy, might act weird, there's a reason behind it. A lot of the things I do, a lot of the reason for being very aggressive is actually there's a logical reason behind it. There's a lot of money in the pot. I want to take a stab at it. I know the math of what the chances are of hitting a hand on the flop, what's the chances of improving your hand when you hit a good flop, you hit a straight draw, a flush draw. Those factors are important in deciding what to do. The aggressive style is heavily supported by the math. A lot of times the money in the pot is very large and it's a big portion of your stack, and you want to take a stab at it. You just don't want to let it go. You want to make your opponent hit the hands. And looking at the math, you know there's a lot of time your opponent is not going to hit. So sometimes, actually, even though I've emphasized how important position is, sometimes you can have situations where both players are looking to bluff, but they only want to bluff a little bit. They don't want to risk all their stack. So being first to act, getting the first stab at the pot is sometimes important. So sometimes when you have big pots, it sometimes nullifies the position because you want to be the first one to get in there. You want to be the first, take a stab, get a reaction from your opponent, maybe get a read on him. So, but being aggressive is definitely the right way. That's the style I've been using for winning tournaments. That's the style that I feel is the correct way if you want to become a winning tournament, no-limit hold'em player. When I mention the math and my background being mathematical and analytical, doesn't mean that I'm a rocket scientist at all. The math involved in the game of hold'em is often very simple. There's 52 cards. I hold 2, my opponent holds 2. There's going to be 5 cards on the flop. A lot of the times it's very simple. It's the probabilities of improving your hand, of making the flush. But sometimes what makes it difficult sometimes is you have a lot of different factors. You have the probability of hitting a flush, but you also have to make the educated guess of what is your opponent holding. So maybe the math warrants a call because you get a good enough pot odds, but maybe if you take into the equation that you don't know for sure what your opponent is holding, maybe the correct play is to raise. Maybe you can win the pot right there, and then you don't have to care about your pot odds. So a lot of times there's maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 different factors that you have to weigh in the equation, and that makes it a little more difficult. And that's what makes poker so interesting. You have to make analytical good guesses on what your opponent is holding. You have to add in the math, the chances of you making a good hand, making the winning hand, or maybe the chances of bluffing, winning the pot later by bluffing. So there's a lot of factors that weigh in. So what you have when you want to do the math is you want to make an educated guess on what your opponent is holding. And since poker is a game of infinite information, you don't know exactly what he's holding. You're always going to make educated guesses. You're going to make educated guesses on what kind of hands he might have. You're going to have to know your probability of your winning ratio with your own holding against the possible hands that he might hold. When the flop comes down, you might think there's a chance you can bluff. Maybe you can't do it now, maybe you can do it later. If the flush comes out there, if the straight comes out there, there's a lot of different factors that weigh in. And your decision making should be based on all those factors. They can be hard and sometimes difficult to incorporate all of them. But if you just try to look at one at a time and say, okay, I know he has a really good hand, but I still have chances to win. I see the flop, looks like it's probably a good flop for me, might have increased my chances of winning. There's a certain amount in the pot. Is my pot odds significantly for me to continue? Am I trying to bluff? Different factors, try and weigh them all in. There's not an equation, there's not a simple formula. You have to put that number in there, but trying to get a good feel for it, doing that by playing more, by analyzing the way you play. Did I do it right? Did I do it wrong? Play a lot of hands, get the experience. The more experience you have, the more good decision making you will be able to make. The more experience in hand values, you know what different hands are worth in different situations. The better educated guesses you're going to come up with, the better sound decision you're going to make at the end. And the better decisions, the better you're going to do. And maybe finally you're going to win one of the big ones. Another advantage to being the aggressor is sometimes I've seen situations where people will slow play big hands before the flop, on the flop. But what it creates trouble because they don't get a real good feel for what the opponent has, which means a lot of times I've seen people set trap for the opponents. And I must admit, it looked good until the end where they actually trapped themselves. They let the opponent hit a magical card. Sometimes they actually let their opponents bluff them. It's very important that you get a feel for your opponent. Be careful in trapping too early. Of course you can